Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get going. It's about 5:15, I think. So this is Jesikah Jones and PTSD. I'm going to read the blurb real quick, and then we'll introduce ourselves and get this party started. Jesikah Jones isn't the first character to exhibit symptoms of PTSD, nor will she be the last. Join us as we discuss ways writers and screenwriters are creating diverse characters like Jesikah Jones with PTSD and other mental illnesses. In terms of representation, what are they getting right and what are they getting wrong? So I'm the moderator, and I'm actually going to start at the other end and let everybody introduce themselves.
I hate being first.
I know.
Thank you, Raven. My name is G. Silverman. I am an author and a graphic designer as well. My books are called Vegan Teenage Zombie Huntress and Stoners versus Moaners. They are comedic young adult horror novels that even elderly people write. Love. They send me letters saying, I read your crazy teen book and I loved it. And I'm like, thank you, I love you too. I am happy to be here today. I've had a lot of my own personal experience with PTSD, and I have so much to say about it. But first, I want to thank you guys. I'm going to ask you all to put your hands in the air and scream really loud so I can take a picture of you. Everybody. Thank you, and now I'm going to pass it on to the lovely Jesikah.
Hello, my name is Jesikah Sundin, and I am a sci-fi fantasy writer mom of 3 nerdlets and a devoted wife to a gamer geek. I write young adult eco-punk fiction, which is the cyberpunk version of ecotopia fiction, which basically means nature versus machine type stuff. Pretty cool. And just like what Gigi talked about, I'm here because I also have a background with PTSD and other things, and I hope that I can lend some great conversation pieces in this next hour, and we can all learn together.
Hi, I'm Bridget Natale, or Bridget A. Natale. There's others. I primarily write speculative fiction. My work that's been published online is mostly flash fiction about the horrors of space. I also am a slush reader for the Devilfish Review, which if you submit a story, I get to read it first and be like, this isn't genre, why did you send it to us? Or like, hey, the editor can decide, I can't. So, yeah, that's about it.
We are much appreciative to Bridget because she's filling in, and I knew she would fill in very well with her capable hands, but she's filling in for somebody as well, so mad props for you being here. But I'm Raven Oak, and I'm a speculative fiction author as well, local to Seattle, and I've got a couple different books out, and this being one of them, mostly again, science fiction and fantasy. But I have a background with volunteering with different nonprofit organizations and hotlines that help people who are suffering with abuse situations, different things like rape and PTSD as well. So this was definitely a panel that I wanted to have us do and talk about, because with shows like Jesikah Jones popping up, we're seeing more of these topics come to the light, things that people don't want to talk about suddenly are there, and they may or may not be easy for us to talk about. So as we get going, I did want to mention that, Jesikah Jones is not exactly the most PG-friendly show. Hopefully you know that, being in the room. So some of the topics we talk about may be complicated and may not be suitable for all ages. Also, they may be a little triggering for some people, and if they are, I do have hotline little business cards up here with numbers if you need a phone number because you need to call somebody and chat. So just be aware that service is available to you if you need it. Alrighty, so on that note, this feels so weird having to lean across you. I know.
Just cuddling up. We're just going to cuddle here.
It's cute.
So looking at something like Jesikah Jones, we see very early in that nightmares in that show, they feel very real to her. That she has flashbacks, that she, you know, doesn't want to sleep, she has paranoia, she has some of the same symptoms that we see in PTSD and PTSD portrayal. They're very real. But they're also relied upon by Hollywood a ton, to the extent that sometimes they feel cliche, depending on what you're watching. But when we see Jesikah Jones experience them, they're organic. They feel realistic. So what was it about the show that made that work for you as a viewer?
Oh, I thought you were going to
You look forward. I thought you were going to take it away, but that's okay. If Gigi wants to start, or Jessica or somebody.
I don't mind. We'll just
You can tell we're tired at this part of the
We're
day.
extremely polite.
Yes.
Who's going? I don't know. Seattle thing. Yeah, I feel like one of the things that made all those things feel a lot more realistic and way less cliche is just simply that Jessica is not a perfect person. Like, in her daily life, she's like, hey, asshole! Started off the blue language. Thank you. You know, she's just kind of rough around the edges, and she's really real, and so that makes the rest of everything else feel real. I have more problems believing when women characters are portrayed as having to be so prissy perfect, where everything about them is perfect, their hair is perfect, their apartment's perfect, everything they do is perfect, and then I had a nightmare. And I'm just like, okay. But everything about her just feels so real that that's what makes it more believable for me.
I think kind of leaning towards that was also they had flashbacks where she was just as much of an asshole before, like, you know, and then she has this other crap she now has to deal with, which she's doing with varying levels of success, you know, just kind of muddling through like the rest of us. But it wasn't like this traumatic experience that she had completely changed her personality.
I think what made it realistic for me, you know, definitely what you both said, but additionally was that so often in books and in TV or movies, we don't get to see the process of healing or the process of functioning day to day. And with Jesikah Jones, you see her, you know, she walks into her room, she'll look at the bed, and then she'll go, I just can't. And then she walks out, and then she walks around the city at night, and then she just goes to work. She has to take her mind off of it, and she has to do things that feel measurable, that make it feel like, even though she can't heal herself, that maybe, even if it's something to do with an affair, she's helping somebody else out. And, I mean, she makes light about it, she makes tons of jokes about that side, but you see that she feels that that is a form of functioning. And when you're dealing with that level of pain, and you're dealing with not knowing if you're safe moment to moment, knowing that, okay, I can do this, I'm really good at this, and I'm going to keep doing this no matter what. And I think for me that is what brought that reality to me, that yeah, this is a story that's telling the truth. Because if you know anybody who has been through any kind of trauma, whether it's abuse or rape or physical assault of any kind, you see that part of their hardship is functioning and feeling like they integrate properly day to day.
It's kind of interesting that you were talking about that, because you talked about how she had this idea that if she's good at something, she's going to do it, and that's what she's going to do. And yet we see that in her story, at least in the television series as it's written, possibly in the comics as well, she is following a hero's journey, right down to the reluctant hero at the beginning. She doesn't want to be a hero. That's not what she wanted to do. And even at the end, you know, she's, you know, talking about how maybe if she lies to herself enough, she can be the hero people expect of her. So we see that reluctance as well. So yes, she's good at something, but she doesn't want to be. Do you think that's a necessity for comic book heroes, for the expectations that readers have, that that viewers have that these people are going to be these reluctant heroes that follow this hero's journey, or can they be more than that or different?
I don't feel like it's a necessity, but I feel like it makes it more modern and more real. Like if you look at Superman, he's just kind of like this all-American do-gooder boy, and
A lot
not
of opinions about Superman. Just warning you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I don't want to get derailed into me defending Superman again. Sorry.
Oh no. I think he's great, but he's like a different type of character, and like I love him to death. Like Superman paraphernalia all over my head. But it's a different kind of hero, and so I think both are awesome, and one doesn't have to be any particular kind of hero to be a hero in my eyes.
I do think, though, that the kind of, Superman sort of fully embracing this idea that I'm going to, do the right thing, I'm going to help people, is kind of seen as naive, in a modern context. It isn't something like Jesikah Jones is a more modern hero. She was designed more recently, so, the reluctance and kind of a traumatic background, it's not the source of her power, at least. But coming to grips with, I am no longer a normal person because of her superpowers and because of what happened to her, that she feels separate from the rest of society. And then how does she handle that going forward is a pretty modern, I think, take on the entire, and you see that a lot with the more modern superheroes. It tends to be more conflict with the actual nature of what they are.
Well, I think when it comes to superheroes and expectations from viewers or readers of whether they should be an anti-hero or not, I think depends on the gravity of the tragedy that follows them and to their superpower moment, or how they transform into a hero, whether they were born a hero or whether they, through scientific, radioactive spiders or whatever it might be, that makes them into that hero later. And I think of the story of Marvel's Thor and Loki. We think of them as the hero and the anti-hero, Loki becoming a villain in the Avengers series. But, for Loki, his story is more tragic than Thor's, so we expect him to be a little bit more reluctant because he has more at stake. And I think that's the same with Jesikah Jones, is that, she has this great tragedy. There's more at stake for her to go out there and be noticed and to be vulnerable and transparent. And that's part of the process of the series, is her coming to grips with that. And that's part of her becoming a hero, is saying, yeah, it's not your fault, I understand. And every time she does that, she kind of grows a little bit more of a hero and kind of sheds that anti-hero shell of protection that she's put around herself.
So we've talked about this a little bit, that Jesikah Jones is more organic feeling and more realistic because she's flawed, because we see her through the day to day. But one of the things that struck me in rewatching the show before the panel was, she talks about turning this corner and not knowing what's on the other side, which is a very realistic grittiness to what happens with people who've been through abuse, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whatever it is. That's that unknown element that really gives those moments this darkness. And so, we see her giving a voice, a very real voice, to what PTSD victims go through, that unknown. And so we've talked a little bit about that, but my question for you guys is, now, what do you think the writers of the show are doing differently that makes that work? And we talked a little bit about what the show in general has done, but specifically, what are the writers doing?
Well, one of the things I noticed right away, having a science background with physics, is Newton's third law of thermodynamics. And you guys can probably finish this for me. For every action, there's an opposite and equal
reaction.
That's right. And so when you have trauma, you know, there is a reaction to that. You know, a lot of times biologically we kind of go into that catatonic shock state. And so at that moment, we're not dealing with it. At that moment, we're kind of shutting down and we kind of go into fight or flight. It's through the recovery process that we start to deal with those things that were done to us, those things that victimize us in society, in our lives, in our family, in our workplace, wherever that trauma might have happened. You know, it eventually bleeds into everything. But what Jesikah Jones, the writers there, do right is that they don't just tell her dark story, they also show the dark side of recovery. They show that pendulum swing the other direction. And that's something I really appreciate because I find that lacking in so many stories that are told. And it's a real disservice, I think, to people who have gone through some kind of trauma because there's a falsehood in how their recovery is shown, to the point where I think it's stigmatized what recovery looks like in the general population who may not know what trauma is. You know, where people who have been abused or raped or physically assaulted or whatever it might have been, you know, sometimes they're considered dramatic, or, you know, just deal with it, you know, calm down, whatever it is. But having shows like Jesikah Jones, it allows empathy to take place with people who may not have understood the process before, because it is equally as dark as what drove her to that point of needing recovery.
I think one of the things that they did that very frequently, I would say almost universally, is actually focus the narrative on her, and in the aftermath, we get very little about what actually happened. We don't need a lot of it. We understand enough to, both from what they show, and also from comparing the flashbacks we get of her before and after, and what he does to other people, that we get enough of what the hell that was for her, that we don't need to see the reality of it. That's not necessary. And what they do is focus the majority of the narrative on her and how she's healing, and or not. Sometimes there's things that won't heal, and that's part of it. You know, I'm trying to think of like how many times, like maybe Captain Picard after the Borg when he had that breakdown with his brother. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I thought that was stunning at the time. I've never seen anything like that on TV, where like this really traumatic loss of control of yourself, like people doing things to you that you don't want them to do, the Borg, but you know, it's the same idea. And his lasting damage from that was, I think, pretty significant for a hero. And then that's what the entire first season. I think also it'd be interesting to see what happens with Jesikah Jones in season 2. What they do with her after she's kind of turned a corner on it. It's not as pressing a crisis, but it's not going to go away.
Well, she's also killed somebody. And
Yes.
yes, he was the person who traumatized her, but at the same time, it's still killing.
Yeah, it's a major change.
I agree with what you all said, and then just to add a little wrinkle on top of that, I think what the show did really well is show that tension between wanting to keep this awful secret to yourself, like this horrible, dark thing that happened to you that, you know, in the back of your head, you're telling you this thing made me bad, I'm not whole, I have this horrible thing that makes me different, no one will ever love me again. So there's the tension between that and just finding allies and finding the people that they know what you've been through and that they're gonna love you and be there for you anyway. And I like that, seeing that process working with people like getting past the need to like hide their trauma away. It's just like, you know, it makes me happy to see people find their allies, find their people, and just come out into the light and just say, like, this is who I am. And I feel like that is really a hallmark of that show for me.
I think one of the one of the things that popped into my head when I was thinking about the question was the idea that a lot of times, especially, well, I don't want to say especially, but a lot of times in speculative fiction, we see trauma used as a plot device. And the victims of it are nothing more than a convenience, something to move us from point A to point B. And in that way, it becomes glorified. So I think that was one of the reasons, don't throw things at me, but that was one of the reasons I could not watch Game of Thrones. Because it felt like that, rather than being part of the character's arc and part of the character's healing, is it felt like a plot device. And so, I think that was one of the things that the writers did do right with Jesikah Jones, is that we do see, as you were talking about, we see that the darkness of healing, like where it has to go for people to get through what they have to get through. And it's not simple, and it's not easy, and it's not something we just flip a switch and next chapter everybody's happy, or next episode everybody's happy and everything's great. And so that was something that kind of popped in my brain.
And a quick add to that, this is something I talk about with my students a lot. I work with teens who are budding writers, and a lot of them have their own issues with trauma, self-harm, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, you name it. And one of the things that is so awesome to see among the kids I work with is they know that this is going to be a lifelong journey for them. They are not, they're not like, yesterday I was cutting myself, tomorrow I'm like shiny and happy and this all goes away. It's like, no, I'm going to live with this forever, but like, I'm healing. It's always going to be part of me, but I'm healing, and I just love that honesty now being part of our culture as a whole, and I think shows like this help.
So, one of the things that also I think possibly makes the show, and in some ways the comics, more realistic in their portrayal of PTSD and in the realities of how complicated abuse can be, especially psychological abuse, is the villain of Kilgrave and the way that he's written. So, like, one of the lines that really hit me was, when he tells Jesikah, I never know if someone's doing what they want or what I tell them to do. How am I to know? And he even gets pretty emotional when he's saying this. We know some of his past in childhood, but he follows it up with, I have to painstakingly choose every word I say. I once told a man to go screw himself. Can you imagine? And it's a comical moment, but it's not. There's this reality that, Kilgrave is not this just simple villain, that there are layers to this guy. So, as viewers and readers, is it possible or even healthy to have sympathy for this devil among us? Is that why he's more believable, or is it something else?
I think when we're dealing with villains who abuse, and this is something I sometimes get a pet peeve with, is that not every bad guy is an abuser, or bad woman. It's and the thing about abusers is that they have a very charismatic side. There's the side that draws you in, and there's the side that allows them to behave as if this isn't happening. And there's a lot of sides of them that a lot of times their victims end up having very complicated feelings, because there are things that they do that can make the victim feel like they love them, and all these other things. And so I think having him have some charisma, having it be David Tennant playing him, who's kind of a beloved actor, is, I think, important to. It's not just this little troll hiding in the bushes. It's the guy everybody loves. It's the perfect mom. It's these people who have public faces that are very good and wholesome, or however charming, that then makes it more difficult to kind of get out of that situation.
yeah, I hope this isn't like too far of a segue, and please stop me if I'm going off the rails here. But I think it's important to realize that yes, a lot of people that are in positions where they are able to abuse others kind of do so because they have such good qualities in a way. Like, I'm probably not expressing myself clearly, but now there are all these allegations against Casey Affleck, you know, in a creative environment like in Hollywood, where, you know, someone who is probably an affable guy, probably a nice guy to a lot of people, but in the right circumstance, what happened? And so I think when you have a villain on TV like Kilgrave, who is charismatic, I mean, I don't think that's super far from real life. Because all it takes is one hurt to make you a bad guy, right?
I think when it comes to like, should we sympathize with the devil, you know, as a character? I mean, this is one of the things that I really like about anime. Is anime is very good at remembering that villains are also human, and that we can't forget the villain's humanity, because then that dehumanizes us. And so I think with the situation with Kilgrave, that was kind of a reminder that that even though he does evil things and he has evil intent, that deep down inside, beneath all of that, he's also a human being. He also has his own humanity that he has forgotten, and he's incapable of seeing the humanity in others. And so I think for that reason, it's good for us to have sympathy for villains in stories, because it kind of develops a different form of empathy that I don't think that we would have before. Not that it justifies or it condones the behavior of those types of people, but that it helps us not to dehumanize ourselves in the process of putting up boundary lines or standing up against what they're doing.
I think that kind of empathy too also helps us understand where people who commit bad things come from. Like, where does toxic masculinity come from? Well, somebody learned that. Where did they learn that from? And so understanding the source, I think, helps prevent that future behavior, because we can teach each other a better way. So
The idea that hurting people hurt others. You know that.
It's interesting that you bring up teaching, because all of us up here at this table, we're all authors. And I think that, you know, I have a background in education, and I think that one of the one of the things that's always struck me about being a writer is that, no, I'm not going to lecture you in my novels, but to some degree, by exploring the what if, by just exploring different cultures or different ideas, alien races, whatever, I'm educating and possibly teaching us to be more empathetic and accepting of others. That's part of my job. You know, if you look at Star Trek, it does the same thing. That same idea of, let's meet all these alien races, not so that we can kill them all, but so that we can understand that, yeah, just because you're different doesn't make you like some iggy bleh, you know, that we're all looking for the same things, you know, someone to comfort us, food, shelter, you know, there are these base needs. So I'd kind of like to take a minute and ask you guys, you know, as authors, you know, would you agree with the idea of educating, and if so, you know, when you're creating your villains and you're creating your scenes, when you have to write something that's traumatic, how do you deal with that? Because that's not something easy to do, yet it's kind of our responsibility to do it.
I have a pretty icky villain in my first book, but I definitely did not want him to be this like cartoon flat villain. For me, it was just really important to show that he got to where he was because psychologically he was his own victim. He was a victim of his own abuse through his family, through his community, and so, you know, he became a toxic male because toxic masculinity was pushed on him, and so psychologically he had his back up against the wall, and so for me that was just really important to explore and just kind of understand, okay, where do, I don't want to say bad guy, but where do people who can do bad things come from? How does this happen? So I just wanted to explore that.
In my story, I guess there's kind of a parallel to Kilgrave in a way that my villain, he does a lot of gaslighting, and he's a puppet master in a way, and he's also a game master, and so he's creating these different realities, and he's distorting people's views of not only themselves but the worlds around them. And I do explore in each of the books a little bit about where he comes from, a little bit what motivates him, what drives him to treat his own family, his employees, or whomever it may be around him, what drives him to behave that way towards them. And a lot of it has to come back to, again, that whole cycle of abuse. You know what you know because of how you were raised, and the choices that we make. And one of the running themes in it is the protagonist. He considers himself the son of a killer. Well, his father considered himself the son of a killer, and his father before him considers himself the son of a killer. So it's like, you've got this ongoing cycle. Who breaks the cycle? And in that, the protagonists are also a little bit villainous themselves, because you have to deal with, what's hard, what you hate about others, and that you recognize in yourself. And so.
I'm trying to think of the things I actually have published. I don't have too many human villains. Usually the villains are like the unbearable emptiness of space and time travel paradox. But in general, when I'm writing and when I'm consuming, my favorite form of villain is the one who thinks they're right, and for but a few minor details would have been right. And a really good example of this was, I don't know if you're familiar with Dragon Age, but Logang, his focus was that this foreign power was going to come invade them, and that's what he was worried about. And instead, it was, well, you should have been worried about the orc army that was invading from the other border. But it wouldn't have been taken a lot for him to be right, and then he would have been the hero. That's my favorite thing. And to kind of circle this back around to Kilgrave, in terms of villains, Kilgrave's power set is fascinating, and I think I could imagine somebody writing him as a good guy, thinking that he was a good guy, because if he wasn't telling people to hurt themselves, if he was telling people to stop hurting others, and what a good guy that is. But it's still the same act of taking away somebody's free will and their ability to consent to what their own body is doing, and it's still just as horrifying. They definitely didn't even try, but in some ways, Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, you removing your ability to lie. You don't have control over what you say anymore. That's a little creepy. And I kind of take that and really amp it up with Kilgrave. But there's definitely heroes who have bits of them that are similar to that, where it's that idea of controlling somebody else.
There we go. That works a little bit better. Sorry. It's fascinating to think of that. I know that when I set out doing the villain in A Maskin's Blood, I kind of did what you're talking about, where it's somebody who's just a step removed from being right. And I think I did that because that's us. We're all one bad day from being a villain in somebody else's story. Probably am a villain, yeah. And you're right about Kilgrave, and you're right about looking at things like Wonder Woman, that lack of control. But gosh, if it could be used for good, and that's even something that comes up in Jesikah Jones when she's sitting there trying to okay, here, let's go save somebody, because he wants her to make him good. Well, not really, but he's playing with it, and she does that, and she asks Trish, what should I do? If you could lasso this for good, if you could harness this power for good, would it be worth doing? If it meant staying with him, and that's a complicated question. We've talked a bit about what they do right, and we talked about what we do as authors. I'd kind of like to look at, maybe the other side of things where, we see a lot of abuse 101 from Kilgrave. We see a lot of gaslighting, a lot of I'm the only one who type of behavior, which is a tricky line to walk. I mean, if you're writing something like that, it's so easy to get it wrong. So, what are some of the things the show got wrong, if any?
Well, I think for me, there was two things that kind of made me go, and that was how quickly Malcolm went from being a drug addict to recovered to suddenly this very capable, functional person in society. And I know part of that is, Trish ends up having like her own story arc as she's like kind of growing a little bit darker. There needed to be another voice of reason that kind of rises up, and so Malcolm kind of fills that place. But that kind of bothered me a little bit because I felt like it was kind of against what the show was doing originally, like showing this whole like road to recovery, and then like boom, Malcolm's suddenly, and there's like no concept of time with that. We don't know how much time has passed from when all of a sudden he gives up the drugs to suddenly better and can function. The other thing that kind of bothered me a little bit was the story with Simpson, and I had not watched the Daredevil, series yet, so I didn't understand where that story arc was coming from. So I was a little surprised. I had to do research and going, what is going on here? Until I realized, it was when I saw the red pill, the blue pill, the white pill, I suddenly was like, oh, wait, this sounds familiar. And, but not knowing, that was definitely like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge for those who do know. But he went from this, I didn't want to hurt anybody, I'm actually a really nice guy, and he was so convincing as that, and then he and Trish have this relationship with each other. And he and Jesikah have always been like, at odds, but when the bomb situation happens and it kind of triggers him, it happened so fast and so quickly, and he went from, kind of this hero in a way in his own right to this villain, just like boom. And it didn't really sit well with me. And I don't know if I can really put a finger on, as to why. Maybe you guys might have a better idea, with that. But yeah, it was a little off for me. So those are the two things that I think in the show that could have been a little smoother, with character transitions and stuff.
I agree with you on the Malcolm thing. Unfortunately, I have like a real shit memory, so I can't really pull out too many other things. Yeah, sorry, I suck.
You don't suck.
No. One thing that I would have liked to have seen more, I don't necessarily say there's something they did wrong, but it's something that I think could have worked in maybe a good way is the idea of triggers not being obvious. I think a lot of her triggers were very kind of concrete and obvious, and which I don't know. I'm sure that it may be true for some people. I had an incident where I was triggered pretty badly by something completely mundane. It took me a while to figure out what was even happening to me. And I think a show that did a really good job with that was Grey's Anatomy with Dr. Owen Hunt. He is a combat veteran who has PTSD, and he is set off by the ceiling fan in his girlfriend's bedroom, like really badly. And it doesn't. And then when she realizes what it is, she just takes her fan down. And it was I think a really interesting scene because it's just the fan circling is what starts this cascade effect, that ends in a pretty violent episode. And I don't, again with the memory, I don't remember anything like that from Jesikah Jones, where it's like the path between like the thing that sets you off versus what is your brain associating with that. I don't recall anything like that in that show.
I don't either that I can think of. I think you're right that it definitely lacked in just the mundane stuff that can trigger somebody. I mean, we go on the internet and you see people laugh about triggers, but they're real things, and sometimes they're stupid things. The ceiling fan. I mean, who would think that a ceiling fan would be a trigger? that's the reality of things like PTSD and mental illness, is that these simple, normal things are just not capable at times. And that's what makes it, I guess, realistic. There was a quote at the very end of Jesikah Jones that I wanted to kind of ask you about and get some feedback on, where we hear her internalized monologue, and she says, "They say everyone is born a hero, but if you let it, life will push you over the edge until you're the villain. Problem is, you don't always know if you've crossed that line." Do you agree with that? Disagree? Thoughts on that? It just seemed like such powerful writing right there, and so apt.
For me, that was such a. I rewound and watched that a couple of times because I didn't know how to internalize that, and I think part of it was the idea that life pushes you over the edge, and to me, I think that kind of shifts blame to life rather than personal choices, and maybe that was the sticking point for me, and it could just be a matter of semantics at that point, it could be what she's really talking about, but, I think a lot of times, it's right, we don't know because we a lot of times become what we fear. And we feel fully justified in our emotions because we're fighting for control. And in our effort to fight for control, we do kind of behave incorrectly towards others and towards ourselves without realizing it. Because we're right in our own mind. We are angry, we're in pain, we're afraid, we're in that fight and flight zone. And so, I think I can agree to a point that, that's true. There's times you don't know you've crossed the line. And then I think there's times when you know you are crossing the line and you still choose to do it anyway.
I think this is something that kind of goes to something that's a weakness in the genre maybe, is that there's this idea that there are villains and there are heroes and that's it. And either you're one or the other. And that's not really what life is. Like we were saying, we're all villains in somebody else's story. We're also heroes in somebody else's story. We're all the protagonists in our own. And we're mostly faces in the crowd, and I think also for her at that moment, she just killed a guy and she's kind of, struggling with the reality of that, which is something that I would imagine most of us it's not something that we have to deal with, that kind of ethical question of, did I just kill this guy? Was that the right thing to do? But I mean, there's always like the smaller, scale, more like not human, that's a human thing, but like more everyday arguments and struggles, and how do we handle conflict, and the reality is we're not going to be actual heroes, and we're not going to be actual villains, and maybe expecting a little more humanity out of the superhero genre is stretching it beyond what it's supposed to be, but I don't know where I'm going with this, but
No, I think you're definitely on the right track, and I think that was a totally apt thing for Jesikah to say, because it is the kind of thing that someone who's kind of been pushed into a place of like almost like extreme point of view, extreme loneliness. It's almost like a Joan of Arc type of thing that you would say when you think maybe you've been hearing voices from God. It's like way past the boundary of like, if you're talking to your friends every day and you have a social network and you have a social code of like what's right and what's wrong, maybe you won't have to think of yourself as like, oh crap, I'm a villain now. So it just felt like a really extreme statement that someone under a lot of duress, who's really isolated,
who just killed a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So,
Well, I've got one more question for my panelists, and after that I'd like to open this up to questions. So there is a microphone right there. If you guys have questions, you are welcome to go stand in front of it, and we will answer questions momentarily. The very last scene, just the very last one that we see, Jesikah says, maybe it's enough that the world thinks I'm a hero. Maybe if I work long and hard, I can fool myself. Then the phone rings. Malcolm picks it up and says, Alias Investigations. How can we help? And in being a hero, whether she wanted to or not, she made others heroes. The fact that he used that "we" really caught my attention. But is that a good thing or a bad thing that she's roped these people in? I'm curious in your thoughts.
I mean, for Malcolm, he was a heroin addict, and now he has a job. I mean, he's not shooting up. But, you know, there is the question of, is it just trading one addiction for another? I guess that's something maybe they'll, you know, they give Malcolm a little more room in the next season. We'll see. Because, yeah, when you can start down the line of vigilantism and, like, well, here's this list of people we need to kill now, and, like, you know, it can get really bad. But I would say, and, you know, Trish went from she's just running a radio show to some, you know, she's Hellcat in the comics, so I'm sure that's where she's headed. So her arc, like you were saying, is kind of like the opposite of Malcolm's. They're gonna cross paths. So I think that is more of a question that they'll be investigating in the second season.
So are you asking whether it's a good thing that Malcolm's helping, or you think it's a good thing that as a hero she's encouraging others to down the road to recovery and participating in the
More of a, as a side effect of being a hero, now the consequence is that other people are stepping forward, and while that may be good, there may be a downside to that. I'm curious whether
Sure.
you agree.
Well, yeah, I think that, you know, there's always a risk whenever anybody is being vulnerable and transparent, and when they're partnering with somebody who also is, you know, still learning self-control over their own life and forming their own new reality. There's always a risk of, you know, re-injury to yourself, I think. But I think in the case of Malcolm, in that case specifically, I think it's good because at the end of Jesikah Jones, we also get this hint that Trish is going darker and that Jesikah needs a new voice of reason. And Malcolm has kind of risen, you know, to that role, that he's there to be there for her while Trish is kind of off trying to understand her own world.
For me, the question takes on a little bit of a different nuance. I think, as is typical of anyone who's survived abuse of any kind, you just think of yourself as like a crap person and that you're not capable of anything and that you're stupid and dumb. And so for her to not feel like a hero, regardless of whether or not like she's on the right side of the law being a hero, you know, it's very typical of what the abuse survivors feel like. Am I even a good person? Like, never mind a hero. So for her to like feel the way she does, I think is natural for her. And then I think, you know, Malcolm kind of coming in is just, you know, again, regardless of what side of the law they're on, that's an ally, and that's someone who's saying, yes, you are a hero and I can be one too. So that's like people coming together and acknowledging that, yeah, they've been kicked down, but they are standing up today, and tomorrow they're going to stand up again together. So it's super interesting for me, that question.
All right, so we're going to open up questions.
Okay. Hello. So for me, Jesikah Jones kind of stand out in like the modern day superhero lineup as a strong female character who you can deeply relate to because she has all these issues and like her story brings up so many things that we just discussed. So my question, like, I don't know as much about comics, especially not mainstream comics. So what would be another character from the comics that you think can bring the same thing to the screen, like whose story you want to see in the same way?
I think she's already in the movies, and she's been introduced in a way that I don't think they'll be using her the way I'm thinking of to answer your question. But Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, she had a lot of struggles with mental health. It's something she still talks about in her comics, that it's like a kind of a day-to-day thing. And she has her own comic. I think it's still ongoing. It's fantastic. I don't know where they're going with her in the movies. I'm not sure if she's going to get the same kind of attention that Jessica Jones got in her show, which is what I would want if they did go down that road with her, because otherwise she becomes like the overpowered woman who has to be put down because she's too dangerous for all of us, like Jean Grey, like all those like you know. But you know, she's, I would say, in the comics is a good example. More recently, is a good example of what you're talking about.
What she said.
Agreed.
I love Wanda.
She's the
Yes.
brain here.
That's actually-
add to anything to that.
That's actually who I was going to say as
Yeah,
well. So
like-
I think that works.
Hi.
Quick thought on Malcolm real quick, because I just loved your thoughts about it, but he was getting a degree in social services before he became an actor. I thought that was really cool. Showed that he was a compassionate person when this happened. One question I have, so I work in social services and I'm an aspiring author. I just do office work, it's nothing fancy. So if I'm looking to write a character or write characters who have mental illnesses, but I'm looking beyond my own experience, because I don't want it to be solely focused on my own experiences with mental illnesses, what resources can you go to outside of just like reading the DSM to pick up how to portray people mental illness accurately, and like you mentioned, without trying to educate everyone, but just portray it as an everyday thing?
I would toss in talk to people with mental illness. I think they're going to be your best resource, because any book you crack open is going to be, you know, secondhand information that's been sterilized for a book. So, you know, if you actually, you know, you're in social work, but, you know, get down in there, volunteer somewhere, talk to the people who are suffering from whatever it is you need to portray. That's going to help you get it right.
I have personally experienced that. So many more people than I thought. Like most of them, my best friends, and like we were just like all like closeted. Like, you have anxiety, I have anxiety. You have OCD, I have OCD. Great, let's party. So it's just literally like, hey, you know, do it in a really safe way. It's like, hey, I'm gonna form this like private group, and like I need help with this. Does anyone have experience with this? I'd love to talk to you about this in a really safe and sensitive way. So simple as that.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Did you want to say something? It's okay.
Does you have more?
I was just gonna say, it depends on your character. You know go to where your character is. So if your character is somebody who's incarcerated, you know, go and talk to somebody who works, you know, the prison systems or, you know, detention centers, and see what their behavior is, because how they're going to react and respond is going to be different from, let's say, you know, a mom who used to have this high-powered career and suddenly now stays home with her child and feels isolated and has to reevaluate what her own personal values are. So it's like, you know, the reactions are going to be different. So whatever character you're writing, you know, go to the scene, you know, in reality, and do research there.
Hi. So I was just curious. I'm just a viewer, and I'm really curious to know how writers and editors and how you justify when. So, for example, we've talked a lot about heroes with PTSD or anti-heroes, but I'm curious about how when villains have PTSD, how you justify like their teammates, for example. So I had a very hard time getting into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I recently got super obsessed with it, and I'm very curious now. So one of the main characters, you discover he's an agent of Hydra, and immediately everybody completely turns on him. And then through this whole second season of the show, you discovered he's actually like this horrible victim of abuse and trauma and abduction, and he was dropped up in the woods for 6 months, and then you find out he was actually in the woods for almost 5 years. He had to kill his dog. All these horrible things happened to him, and all of his teammates completely turn on him. And it really affected how I viewed not him, but all of his teammates around him. I have a really hard time watching the show now, because I now view the teammates, you know, the good characters that are supposed to be so understanding. They're so understanding of each other, and they left him. And I have a hard time like liking those characters now. And you understand not just his trauma, but you understand their feelings of betrayal. You understand how they can't let it go, and the relationship will never be the same again. But they try to kill him multiple times, and you see as slowly as these relationships progress, everybody gets farther and farther away from each other.
So are you asking like how we deal with that? How we write
How
that?
as writers,
how
how
do we
do
avoid
you just maintain it's too much. That character is never going to come back. Those relationships are never going to be the same. But you should still like these characters. They're still good and they're still together, even if this character's now on the outside. Like how do you do that? How do you make that okay with these original characters that are still technically supposed to be the good characters?
I think part of the answer to that is that just like those teammates, everybody's going to have their own individual reaction. So even as a writer, you can do everything right to make everybody likable, but a reader can still read it and still say, I don't like this, and I don't like those characters, and I don't like how they're treating each other or how they're reacting or responding. But I think for me, when I'm writing things, I try to always bring in that thread of humanity. So even if somebody is having a negative reaction to a moment that should have some empathy, I try to show why they're having that negative reaction, because they also have their own story. We all have our filters. So what is their filter? How are they seeing the world, and why they're reacting the way they are, or do they have a different motivation that's involved in being negative? I hope that helps.
My question is regarding whether or not Jesikah is a hero or feels like she's a hero at the end. Just remember at the very end of the show, she's scrolling through or listening to her voicemail, and this woman calls up and says, I'm in an abusive relationship with my boyfriend, I'd like some help getting out of it. Yes, exactly. Almost, it seemed like Jesikah was rather contemptuous even at that time, to me anyway. And I was wondering if it was, well, this is a situation that was sort of like mine, only mine was much worse, therefore I don't need to help you when I was ill. If I'm reading too much into that or being too harsh on Jesikah.
I would say it's hard to say. She doesn't verbalize why she did that. So your reading of it isn't necessarily wrong. For me, seeing it was more of, I can't deal with this right now. It's too close. And is she a hero? I would say yes. She's uncomfortable with that title for sure. And as a hero, what is her responsibility to herself? Because she still is healing. And she's, it's that little metaphor of like, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help anybody else. And that was her, to me, what I saw was her putting on her oxygen mask and being like, I
can't do this now?
Yeah.
Killed a man.
Yeah. And what is she going to do? Like, is she going to kill that guy when she goes? He's, because he beat up his girlfriend. Like, I mean, we have a legal system for that. Like, he's not Kilgrave. But, yeah, so she's not, complete white hat. It's still kind of gray. But yeah, that would, you're not wrong, but that's just how my good reading. We have 1 minute left.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
We have 1 minute, so you're our last question, and we're gonna be like wrapping up.
Okay, so warning spoilers if anyone hasn't finished the show. You guys already kind of spoiled it. So I want to know your guys' opinions on both season 2 and the Defenders, which will have her in it. With the fact that now Kilgrave is dead, how her PTSD is going to look moving forward, considering a lot of times stereotype is, oh, well, that person is dead now, so now you don't have to feel those things anymore because your abuser is, not there to abuse you anymore, or, even be the paranoia. So I was curious of what you guys are hoping to see moving forward with season 2 and Defenders, now that giving all that context into it.
I mean, the crisis moment is over, right? Like, the real crisis was when she was in the abusive situation. That was like, and then there's the aftermath that was so traumatic because it could start again at any point. And that part is over, but you're still. I would be surprised if she was, healed, and like she has no issues after that.
Yeah, I think Gigi also had something to add.
Yeah, I think it will never go away for her is my personal read on it. So I expect her to be uncomfortable forever.
I think at the end we see Trish exploring the origins of where Jesikah got her powers, and I think that that's going to be a big arc in season 2, and that's obviously going to be very difficult for her because that's something she doesn't know about her past, and she's got a lot of guilt wrapped into the death of her parents and her brother.
We are officially out of time, and thank you guys for
Thank
coming
you.
and talking to us about this. And some of us have bookmarks and business cards too if you're interested, but otherwise, have a great con.